Hi guys, so I've had this requested quite a few times. Can you please compare the Xiaomi Mi Notebook Air, the 13-inch version, the new revised one with the i5-8250U, 8GB of RAM, and the 256GB of storage to the larger Pro model, which I have right here. Now, if you've seen my review of this one, you would have probably seen me comment finally at the end of it that I said that this model is just far superior, and I'm basically going to point out why. Now, when we have a look at them side by side, the spec is the same, but there is a difference on the RAM. So the configuration of both of these is the 8GB of RAM. However, it's dual channel on this Pro model and only running in single channel here. So that's going to take a bit of a performance hit on that 13-inch model. Now, the other thing to point out is that both of these, if you're going to get one of these, that it will ship, if it's shipping with a sealed box, it will come with Windows 10 in Chinese. Now you can upgrade to Windows 10 Pro for very cheap, get one of those CD keys online, and that will save you the hassle of drivers and also losing the recovery partition. When you do reset the PC, it will actually have that language pack on there that you've installed, so that's great to know that. Now, looking at the obvious here, the size between both of these, you can see that this has a much smaller footprint here, the 13-inch model. Now, this one is about 14.5 millimeters thin. That's not including the little feet on the rear. And then the 13.3-inch model, this is around 13.5. So there's only a 1 millimeter difference in thickness, which is quite amazing that they've managed to do that here. Now, the weight of them, so we've got 1.32 kilos is the 13.3-inch model. And then it is 2 kilos almost. So it's about 1.98 kilos for the 15.6-inch model, and this is really stating the obvious. It's why you would get this model, the 13-inch one, really, especially after what I'm going to show you now in this video, that you get it for the size, the portability, and the weight, because almost 2 kilos is just way too heavy for some people when you consider you add the power pack, which is about another 180 grams or so more on top of that, just to cover things that are basically the same with them. So the trackpad is obviously way larger on the 15.6-inch model. That makes it a little bit more comfortable, but the accuracy and the use of it is basically exactly the same. Same goes for that fingerprint reader. So fingerprint unlocking, it's blistering fast. I mean, it only takes literally a second to unlock, second or two, and you're straight into Windows, which is really good. Now, the keyboards. Okay, so the newer model does have the improved keyboard. So the plastic they've used is slightly better. It just makes it easier to look at those backlit keyboards too, with the black instead of the silver on the previous model, which is a good move there by Xiaomi. So overall, the keyboard, okay, typing on the 15.6-inch version just feels so much better because the keys have better feedback to them. They have a slight curve to them inwards on them, just making them ever so slightly more comfortable there to type on. Not that 13.3-inch keyboard is bad to type on. No, not at all. It's a good keyboard to type on, and it's comfortable as well for the size. Port-wise, if we have a look here, they're basically the same. You just get the extra SD card reader on the Pro, and you also get a USB 3 Type-C port. So both of the Type-C ports on these two models, they support up to 4K 60 Hz output. And the HDMI ports you can see here, well, they only support up to 30 Hz 4K out because they're HDMI 1.4 spec and not HDMI 2. So sadly, both of these models are missing Thunderbolt 3, which they should definitely have, and that's a big mistake from Xiaomi not to include that. Now, to take a look at the internals of them, both of them have these separate spare SSD slots on here. So it will take either PCI times 4 or SATA 3 drives on there, the 2280 spec. Now, the battery difference is massive, of course, because look at how small it is compared to the 15.6-inch model, the 13-inch model. You can see the battery there is only 39 watt hours, so nowhere near as big. And then having a look now at the cooling, you can see we've got a smaller fan and a slightly larger fan and the same copper thermal transfer pipe. So this is why we've got some limitations there on the cooling. And then if you have a look now at the 15.6-inch model, we have a massive 60 watt hour battery. So to speak about the battery life too, you can get up to 10 hours of light web use on the 15.6-inch model and about 6.5 on the 13.3-inch model. So there's a huge difference, of course, because of the large different capacity there of those batteries, because one is way bigger, almost double the size there. Now looking at the cooling too on the Pro, you'll see that we've got larger fans and they are separate two fans there. So really good cooling on this. It does the job well, and you don't normally see the GPU go over 74 degrees, and the CPU should never really go over about 78, 80 or so. So cooling does do its job really well. But on the other hand, on this 13.3-inch model, you run into thermal throttling all the time if you do anything demanding, which we'll talk about a little bit more now in detail. Okay, so even though they do have the same chipset, the i5-8250U, I've got their stock values on everything, so I haven't tweaked or changed, undervolted or done any of that, nothing to the power limits, and you can see here there's quite a bit of a difference here. Now the reason is because one of them's running single channel RAM, which is of course the smaller model. That is why we have this difference here. You can see it's taken quite a hit on the performance when you check out a synthetic benchmark here. This is Geekbench 4. The same applies to anything across the board. You'll have similar results. So you're going to see a difference anywhere from around 10% to almost up to around 20% performance hit because of the single channel RAM, and because of thermals, it runs into thermal throttling, which I'll show you in just a second. So those are the CPU scores here. Now if I move over and show you the GPU, that's more or less exactly the same. So no real difference here until you start to game. Now when you game, it will not turbo as high the MX150 in the 13-inch model because of the thermals. It runs into more restrictions there, and it's actually clocked a little bit lower too, so that is why. But if you want more details on that, like I've said in this review here, please check out the full reviews of each of these models here. Now just to quickly go over to Intel XTU, this is quite interesting here, just to point out what happens on both of these and how different they really are. Very different in terms of the cooling performance, of course, different sizes here. The advantage goes to, of course, the larger model. But if we have a look, I ran that Geekbench 4 test, and you'll see right here that we ran into, it's a little bit hard to make it on camera, sorry, I'll just zoom into this for you, that we ran into some thermal throttling here on the 13-inch model. And you can see that yellow bar here is actually the thermal throttling that was happening. So that was the whole time going on and off from thermal throttling. And you'll see here that it peaked with the Geekbench 4 test at 80 degrees Celsius. And if I move over now and we'll have a look at the 15-inch model, that one, really interesting here, it only peaked at 64 I think was the maximum. No, so yeah, 64 degrees Celsius. And that did not run into any thermal throttling. Now I haven't got it selected there to show you, but trust me, it didn't run into it at all, because thermal throttling is triggered around about, I think it's 73 degrees, at least on the 13-inch model. So there is a big difference there in the thermals and the performance of that. As I pointed out in my review of the 13-inch model, quite disappointed with the fact that, you know, they're the same chip, but they are just really different beasts here when it comes to that. Now, SSD performance, they're both running the Samsung PM961, as I pointed out at the start, and more or less the same kind of speed, but you will see that it is faster, the reads on the 15.6-inch model. It could be down to the drive, or it could be down to the fact that we do have slightly faster CPU performance on that one. So just to show you here the BIOS versions of each. So I haven't changed the BIOS versions, this is what they have come with. So you can see there, that's the Bank 0. We've only got the 8GB of RAM and single channel on the 13-inch model. And then if I move over now, of course, to the 15-inch model, you will see that it has Bank 0, sorry, and then Bank 2 full, so 4GB each, running in dual channel, and here is the BIOS version. So to point out, this BIOS version is actually a newer one that's come with this model. It says it's dated from the 2nd of November, but what's interesting to point out is that the core in Intel XTU, it will give me full controls here, so I can adjust the voltage and also the power limits. Now what happened is later on they locked us out of this in a few of the revisions of that BIOS, but it seems that Xiaomi's changed their mind again and decided to let us play around with it. Now this is really good because it allows you on the 15-inch model to increase the Turbo Boost max power. You can put that up to something like 35 and it will perform really well. It will hold the 3.4 turbo on all cores for as long as it wants, really, as long as it can, and you shouldn't run into actually any thermal throttling as long as you give it a little bit of an undervolt. Now, the same goes for the smaller version, but it's kind of pointless to do this, even though the power limits are unlocked, as I will show you. You can see here, they are unlocked. So you can tweak that up to 35 watts, but there's no point whatsoever because you will hit thermal throttling in a matter of seconds, so you get zero gain. So if you must have the best performance, go for the 15.6-inch model. So with the screen side by side, you can see there's a clear difference. This should be coming out on the video, that if you have a look at the 13-inch model, you will notice that the blacks look deeper. Now, the 13-inch model has an sRGB of somewhere around 84%, I think it is, and then 78% on the 15.6-inch model. I mean, they're not wonderful figures. If you're professionals out there, you want to use this and you want full coverage, then you're going to have to tweak the screen a little bit. You're still not going to be able to get it out of these panels, but these panels, to me, they are very decent for 1080p panels. Of course, they're covered with fully laminated glass there, and they are quite reflective, but the blacks and the sharpness and the color reproduction on the 13.3-inch model is where this one gets a win, and it is probably the only win it will really get, apart from, of course, the obvious, the size and the weight. And there's also a little bit of light leakage and bleed on the 15.6-inch model that you get a little bit. Now, this will vary from unit to unit. You can probably make it out here just on the edges where that black is, just a tiny little bit of that bleed or that leakage you get on the corners, and you really only see it when you're looking at a completely black image that is being displayed. So it has never bothered me because I'm never looking at just a complete black screen, ever. Onto sound now. So you probably guessed it that the 15-inch version does sound a little bit richer, fuller the sound. They're both AKG tuned speakers, downwards firing. I'll give you a sample of both of them, but hopefully with my mic you will be able to pick up the difference. Now, both of them are set to 100% volume. So you should have heard from that quick sample there that the 15.6-inch Pro model is not only louder, but it does have quite a bit more bass to it. Now, to briefly touch on fan noise, definitely the 15.6-inch model runs cooler, of course, so the fans come on a lot less. You hardly even hear them. Now, right now, both of these machines are basically idle, and for some reason, the 13-inch version, the fan is running anywhere between about 60 and 80%. And I don't even think the fan is on the 15.6-inch model. It doesn't take anything for the 13-inch model for the fan to come on. So even when you're sometimes just an Internet Explorer, which, well, I currently am at the moment, this is enough for that fan to be triggered. And I even posted that in my cons of the review of the 13-inch 2018 model, that the fan noise is a little bit annoying and irritating at times. And if fan noise bothers you, then definitely I would stay clear of it, because it can just get a little bit annoying, because sometimes it's like, well, I'm not even doing anything demanding. Why is that fan constantly on? And again, it's because of the cooling limitations in the smaller model. Okay, so really easy to wrap things up here. You would go for this model if you want this slightly better screen, slightly sharper, better contrast, better blacks, and it doesn't have as much weight. In fact, this panel has no IPS bleed around the edges. None of that, no, which is great. The size of it, of course, is so much smaller and it's so much lighter. So that's probably the main reason why someone would even consider this model over the 15.6-inch model. For me, the compromise is worth it. Okay, yeah, it's almost 2 kilos, which is starting to get a little heavy, especially for the type of laptop it is. But the improved cooling on it is just so much better. Thermal throttling on this one, no thermal throttling on this whatsoever. The fact that I can tweak up the power limit and get it to perform pretty much the same as an i7 7700 HQ is pretty amazing too for that. Keyboard's great, touchpad is basically the same, but the larger size just makes it so much more usable. We do get an extra port. The SD card reader is a nice bonus to have on this for professionals out there, that if you forgot your reader, even though it's limited to only USB 2 speeds, it's still, of course, handy to have. So yes, performance, everything, this one is the clear winner apart from size, weight, and screen. Thanks a lot for watching this review. Now, I didn't go into super amounts of detail in this particular video. If you want detailed reviews of both of these models, then please check out my reviews here. So the review of the Mi Notebook Air 13, the 2018 edition, is right up here. And then my Mi Notebook Pro 15.6-inch model, this is the i5 version, that review is right here. Thanks a lot for watching, and I do hope to catch you back in the channel soon. Bye for now.